This is CNN Breaking News.
Good morning. So glad to have you with us. I'm Christy Paul.
I'm Victor Blackwell. The breaking news this morning out of the Houston area. Sheriff's deputies have arrested a suspect in the deadly shooting of 7-year-old Jazmine Barnes. Let's get now straight to Kaylee Hartung, who is joining us from Houston. Kaylee, tell us what you've learned.
Hey, well, Victor and Christy, overnight, the Harris County Sheriff's Department filing capital murder charges against a 20-year-old man named Eric Black Jr. They say they identified him based on a tip. They brought him in for questioning without incident, and they say he later admitted to participating in the shooting. Authorities not explaining his participation specifically. Let's note they have not named him as the gunman, and they say that they are continuing to pursue evidence that they say could lead to others being charged in the murder of 7-year-old Jazmine Barnes. In a statement from Harris County Sheriff Ed Gonzalez, he says, "I am grateful to our dedicated investigators, the partner law enforcement agencies that provided vital assistance, and tipsters from across the nation who pulled together to support our work to get justice for Jazmine. Our work is not finished," he says, "but I believe the people of Harris County can take comfort in knowing we have made great progress." I think the important line there, our work is not finished. And Victor and Christy, authorities say that all evidence they've gathered to this point supports their strong belief that Jazmine and her family were innocent victims here. They say they do not believe they were the intended targets of this shooting. They say it possibly could have been a case of mistaken identity.
Wow. Kaylee Hartung there for us. Thanks so much.
So for an understanding of what's happening in Texas, criminal defense attorney Janet Jackson and former FBI Assistant Director Tom Fuentes both with us now. Thank you both for being here. Janet, I want to go to you first. So the statement says he has admitted to taking part. They are not characterizing this man that they do have in custody as a shooter. If he's not the shooter, would he still be eligible for capital punishment?
That's a great question. He is as guilty as the person who pulled the trigger. So there's no distinction between the actual gunman and anyone who participated in any way in that process. So he would be, but he also is probably the most valuable witness they have at this point because he's already talking. Whether he had a lawyer or not, we don't know, but he's already admitted to his participation. You can bet that law enforcement are telling him it will go better for you. Maybe we don't even seek capital punishment if you give up the other people.
So, Tom, what do you make of the admission of involvement at this point?
Well, I think that's a great break for the police officers that he agreed to talk in this case and make any kind of a statement. He certainly, once he was arrested, he had no requirement to speak. You don't have to answer questions. He could have remained silent. So that's a great assistance to the investigators that he's made a comment in this case. I think also the fact that he has made comments that have indicated that this family was not the intended victim, well, then in that case, who was? Was he already out on a mission to murder somebody in particular when this happened, and he just happened to pick the wrong car to shoot at? That remains to be announced, I guess, by the police also.
So, Janet, if this man turns out not to be the actual shooter, and he is helpful, you anticipate that capital murder charge might change?
I do. As a defense attorney, I would certainly say, he'll get a court-appointed attorney or maybe a family member securing an attorney to defend him. And any attorney would negotiate away the capital part of those charges in exchange for his information, which I think they're already indicating is probably pretty valuable.
Tom, the sketch that was released before the arrest was based on a description by Jazmine's mother and also a few sisters. The police said that this sketch was of a white male in his 40s. Now, they are still looking for people. The sketch is on the screen right now. But the person they arrested is 20 years old. How reliable typically are those descriptions from victims of crimes like this?
Well, Victor, they vary a great deal, and in some cases they might be pretty exact, depending on how good of a look the person or the witness got of the person and how accurate the person drawing the sketch is, or how skilled they are. So, in this particular case, it may have been more helpful that they had an enhanced picture of the red pickup truck. And I know that, that's not a scarce item in the Houston, Texas area to see pickup trucks, but that particular color, the fact that it was an extended cab, the fact that it was in that particular area at that specific time could have led additionally for whoever called in the tip to think, okay, I think it's this guy because his truck matches the description, and even if the drawing of him personally is a little bit off, we'll find out. On the other hand, we don't know if somebody else was driving the truck and that's the person who was sketched, and he was a participant with another individual or group of individuals, so we don't know that yet.
Okay, so Tom, I want to ask you real quickly. Lee Merritt is an attorney who is involved in this case in some capacity, and he has said he believes this case may be related to one back in 2017, a similar incident in terms of somebody innocent being shot, same kind of truck, he alleges, and there has been nobody found in that case back in 2017. Will authorities help us understand what authorities are doing now as they look into the backgrounds of the people this man that they have in custody and any other people they may be talking to?
Well, particularly with, the individual in custody or other suspects that have been identified, is they'll be trying to trace back to previous unsolved cases of where these individuals were at that time. Do they have an alibi for where they might have been or what they were doing at the time of those incidents, and how closely do the descriptions match and other details of the shootings match? And additionally, in these cases, you'll have forensic evidence. You'll have the bullets themselves, what caliber gun was fired, was handguns, rifle. They will have some of that evidence to work with and compare to other unsolved or even solved cases.
Janet, how long do you expect this suspect to continue to communicate, considering that, as Tom highlighted, as I think most people watching know, he is under no obligation to continue to speak with investigators?
Victor, that's a great question, because initially he obviously did cooperate. Whether he lawyers up, which is an expression everyone knows, really remains to be seen. But as a defense attorney, it wouldn't be against my advice to say, look, you've already cooperated. Let's keep negotiating. Tom made a great point. If we know about other murders, if we know about other unsolved crimes, your value goes up, and they may have you on this case. So you need to keep talking in order to make your situation better.
All right, Tom Fuentes and Janet Johnson, we appreciate both of you being here. Thank you.
Thank you.
This morning, the president will go to Camp David to meet with senior White House officials about border security.
Well, back in Washington, another shutdown meeting being planned this afternoon between White House officials and congressional leadership staffers.
Yesterday's meeting brought another round of demands from both sides. Very little progress, though. And now, as the shutdown gets closer to becoming the third longest in history, a White House official says the president may decide to declare a national emergency to get border wall funding.
From the White House now, CNN White House reporter Sarah Westwood. Sarah, when we hear that the president is truly considering claiming a national emergency, do we know, have they indicated any sort of timeline, how much time he is willing to give all of the people involved here as they try to come up with a remedy?
Well, good morning, Christy and Victor. And President Trump said earlier this week on Friday in the Rose Garden that he would have hoped to get funding for the wall legislatively, but that a national emergency declaration is on the table as he tries to get funding for the border wall. Now, that meeting that Vice President Mike Pence led on behalf of the administration yesterday didn't produce much progress. That's what representatives on both sides of the aisle are saying. An aide to the vice president said that no dollar figures were even discussed when it comes to the wall, only border security priorities. An acting White House Chief of Staff / Budget Director Mick Mulvaney emerged from that meeting saying very little progress was made and that he got the sense Democrats were there simply to stall. Take a listen to what he told CNN's Jake Tapper.
I think the president said for a long time that it's $5.6 billion for border security, including the wall. We recognize that things like technology are important, border crossings are important, but certainly a barrier is important. We didn't make much progress at the meeting, which was surprising to me. I thought we had come in to talk about terms that we could agree on. They were actually, in my mind, there to stall, and we did not make much progress.
Nope. Now, President Trump tweeted after he was briefed by Mulvaney and Pence and others in the room that he learned there hadn't been much headway made in that meeting. The president remains dug in behind his demand for $5.6 billion to fund the wall, even though previously he had signaled he would be willing to come down and perhaps accept less money for the wall. Now it appears $5.6 billion is his hardline number. Democrats dug in to their refusal to fund any kind of barrier along the southern border, expressing their belief that it would be an ineffective way to secure the southern border. So both sides remain deeply entrenched as today the president heads to Camp David for a senior staff retreat, and White House officials and aides to congressional leaders plan to meet yet again.
Sarah Wishwood, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
So the question is, can the president actually declare a national emergency here, the crisis at the border, determine it's a crisis, and then use that to build the border wall? If he does, what will happen then? We'll discuss with CNN political analyst Julian Zelizer.
Also, Senator Elizabeth Warren on the campaign trail across Iowa, how she responded to voters with tough questions about her claims of Native American ancestry.
Government shutdown, day 16 now with no end in sight. White House officials now say the president is considering declaring a national emergency to secure funding for the border wall. That is sure to be one of the topics discussed during that meeting at Camp David today. Soon the president will be headed there for a retreat. And the president says he will be joining senior staff for meetings on border security and many other topics. I want to bring in now CNN political analyst Julian Zelizer. He is the author of Fault Lines, A History of the United States Since 1974. Julian, welcome back. And let's start with just the basic question here. And there is some disagreement. There's a write-up in the New York Times this weekend saying the president cannot use the National Emergency Act to build a wall. What do you think?
I think it's ambiguous, and that's why it's going to be a political problem. There's many experts who say this is a misuse of emergency power to basically do what Congress is not allowing them to do on a funding issue. That said, since the 1970s, we've seen emergency power used by presidents often and without much pushback. Certainly after 9/11, George W. Bush used emergency power frequently. So my guess is this is going to be settled in the end in whether the Senate would tolerate it. And at least so far, Republicans have been willing to sit tight when the president flexes his muscle.
So the president will be at Camp David today. He says to talk about border security, many other things. This initially was planned by the now acting chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, to talk about priorities for 2019. What's realistic? Each side has talked about infrastructure as a possibility.
Yeah, I don't think there's a lot of room, frankly, for compromise unless the president concedes. I don't think the Democrats are really willing to give on this issue, even if there's some kind of infrastructure plan, unless the president drastically curtails what he's requesting. Democrats are basically giving him everything he wants at this point, other than this quote-unquote wall. So the real question is, do Senate Republicans start to put pressure on the president to move back and threaten to override the entire deal? That's where the real power is. They can override the president, and that's what we're looking for at this point.
Now, for legislative priorities beyond the wall and that disagreement, that stalemate, we should call it, if you consider we're ramping up toward 2020 and the investigations that will come as part of the Democrats taking control of the House and the continuing Mueller investigation, was there any place that was fertile even before the stalemate on the wall?
No, I mean, infrastructure is always the elusive dream where there's going to be some kind of bipartisan compromise in a new era of President Trump. But I don't think there is much room for common ground. I think Democrats are not willing to really concede to many of the president's demands. But more important, the president doesn't want to compromise. I mean, he has shown he runs a partisan strategy. He plays to a partisan base. And there's not many issues where that partisan base agrees with what the rest of the country wants. So maybe a small infrastructure plan can pop up between now and 2020. But given the atmosphere you're talking about, I don't think we should hope for much legislation.
Okay, so the government shutdown now, day 16. Tying for the third longest, will soon head toward the second longest shutdown. What typically moves one side or the other when there is a stalemate like what we're seeing?
Political pressure. The most famous case was in 95 and 96 when Republicans forced a shutdown when President Clinton was in office over spending disputes, and ultimately Newt Gingrich, who was Speaker of the House, backed away because the public outcry against what a government shutdown means in practice was so severe, Republicans realized this was a disaster politically, so they conceded. And this is usually what happens. This happened under Obama's presidency as well. But we don't know how this is going to unfold. President Trump acts in very different ways than most politicians, and it's not the traditional rules of the game in effect anymore.
So help us understand what's happening potentially inside this room. The Washington Post is citing two Trump aides saying that when Vice President Pence went to the meeting yesterday at 11 with Democratic aides, that he was not given permission to float any new numbers or any new figures, but to hold to the $5.6 billion. So if that's the line and there's no permission to negotiate, to move, and potentially for the same thing for Democrats, what's the point of meeting? I mean, I guess it's good theoretically that they're meeting, but if nobody is willing to move, why are they doing it?
Well, look, there's the political theater of it, and the administration, as well as Congress, wants to show they're trying to the public. So that matters politically, that they're not literally sitting in silos, not talking to each other. But I think for someone like Speaker Pelosi, who's a very shrewd politician, if you have lines of communication, it's always better than if you don't. And especially with a president who's pretty isolated and pretty removed from the political process, it's important simply to be in the room, simply to create potential points of contact and breakthrough. And a government shutdown is not normal. It's not good for the country. And this is in some ways a national crisis. And so I think it's still better to have these conversations, even if they're fruitless, even if nothing's happened, than to totally shut down any kind of talk.
All right, Julian Zelizer, we'll see if today's talks are fruitful at all. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
And be sure to watch State of the Union with Jake Tapper this morning. On the show, the acting White House Chief of Staff, Mick Mulvaney, as well as House Intelligence Committee Chairman Representative Adam Schiff and Alabama Senator Doug Jones. State of the Union, 9 a.m. Eastern, right here on CNN.
Still to come this morning, a major break in the shooting death of Jazmine Barnes. Police have arrested and charged a man who admits that he was part of the shooting. That's according to the Harris County Sheriff. A live update. Breaking news in the shooting death of Jazmine Barnes. The Harris County Sheriff's Office has arrested and charged 20-year-old Eric Black Jr. with capital murder.
Black was arrested based on a tip, and he later admitted to taking part in the shooting. Authorities say they don't believe Jazmine's family was the intended target of the shooting, but rather a casualty of mistaken identity. Investigators are still gathering evidence that could possibly lead to other suspects.
CNN correspondent Kaylee Hartung is in Houston outside the Sheriff's Department right now. So we understand, Kaylee, that it was a tip that came into them that led them to this suspect?
Yeah, that's right, Christy. Authorities had been begging for the public's help through this investigation. That composite sketch was released, the video surveillance of the truck. They knew that this case could very possibly be broken with the help of the public, and it appears that that's what happened. The Harris County Sheriff's Department saying that this man was identified with the help of a tip. They say they took him into custody without incident in East Harris County. That's the area where the shooting occurred, and through the course of questioning, they say he admitted to taking part in the shooting. And that's the interesting line here that we're hearing from authorities, that he took part in the shooting. They're not outlining specifically the role he played. They haven't specifically named him the gunman, but he is in custody and he is being charged with capital murder. And as Victor mentioned, they say they are pursuing evidence that could lead to additional people being charged in relation to this case. And when we were first made aware that something could be coming overnight, it was actually late yesterday where the Harris County Sheriff's Department tweeted that This investigation has taken a new direction. They said they were interviewing persons of interest. This story is still developing, and we will be here to follow it for you, Victor and Christy.
So, Kaylee, I know it's only been a few hours, and we understand if these answers have not yet come from investigators. But there was that sketch that was released, described to be a white male in his 40s. Obviously, the suspect who was arrested is 20 years old. Are they still looking for this person? Do they believe that this sketch is of the suspect they have in custody? What do we know, if anything, about those other persons of interest?
Truthfully, at this time, very little. In a statement from the sheriff, he said, I'm grateful to our dedicated investigators, the partner law enforcement agencies that provided vital assistance, and tipsters from across the nation who pulled together to support our work to get justice for Jazmine. Our work is not finished, Sheriff Ed Gonzalez said in this statement, but I believe the people of Harris County can take comfort in knowing we have made great progress. So there you have the sheriff saying our work is not finished. And while we do not have any other details on the persons of interest who they were interviewing, you recognize that this situation is evolving. And as they say, they are pursuing additional evidence that could lead to the arrest of other suspects.
All right. Kaylee Hartung, thank you so much. I know it's a developing situation. We appreciate the update.
All right, let's get you this dramatic video. This is out of Corpus Christi, Texas. Police officers and people who were just driving by nearby flipped over a burning car on the freeway to try to help save a man who was trapped in that car. Watch.
Fire extinguisher.
Who says there aren't good people in the world? Just getting out of your car and running to help this guy.
Yeah, and so glad they did. The drivers were out of the vehicles trying to push the car. When the police arrived, the officers jumped out, of course, to help. You see him there in the yellow vest. And once they flipped over that burning car, police were able to pull the 70-year-old driver out of the wreckage. And officials say the car was hit by a wrong-way driver who died at the scene. The man who was rescued from the burning car survived. He's expected to be okay.
Thank goodness. Thanks to those people. Take a look at this video out of New Zealand. Look at that fireball streaking across the sky. This is over Auckland. It was visible for several minutes. Astronomy experts and satellite tracking officials say the fireball was the remains of a Russian missile early warning satellite falling back to Earth. So Senator Elizabeth Warren hitting the campaign trail across Iowa this weekend, pushing for the Democratic presidential nomination for 2020. In speeches across the state, the Massachusetts senator pushed for, quote, structural change in Washington.
First piece of bad news is I picked up a cold. Too much time with little people, so I will do my best to croak through this. Second piece of bad news, not enough room for everybody to get inside. But what is that we got a lot of folks here in Des Moines who are fired up and ready to make change.
Well, she faced some tough questions yesterday. One voter confronted Warren about her decision to try and prove her claims of Native American ancestry. CNN national political correspondent MJ Lee has that part of the story.
Senator Warren has had a busy 24 hours in Iowa, her first trip since she announced her Presidential Exploratory Committee on New Year's Eve. She attended over 4 events in the course of 24 hours across the state, introducing herself to the people of Iowa and making clear what her important issues are going to be in her eventual 2020 presidential campaign. Now, one question that she got from an audience member in Sioux City on Saturday was about her decision to release a DNA test about her Native American ancestry. This person in the audience asking her why she decided to release the results of that test and give President Trump more fodder to bully her. This is what she responded.
I am not a person of color. I am not a citizen of a tribe. Tribal citizenship is very different from ancestry. Tribes and only tribes determine tribal citizenship, and I respect that difference. My decision was, I'm just going to put it all out there. Took a while, but just put it all out there. All of my hiring records, including a DNA test, it's out there, it's online, anybody can look at it. It's there.
Now, even though Senator Warren has been drawing big crowds all of Saturday, doesn't mean that everyone who is coming to her events are necessarily supporting her. In fact, a lot of the voters that we spoke to here over the weekend telling us that they're simply undecided and they're looking forward to getting to know many of the other potential Democratic candidates who are sure to come by Iowa over the next couple of months. And this is just going to be a first impression that Senator Warren makes to the people of Iowa. Back to you.
MJ, thank you so much. We're going to have more on Elizabeth Warren in the next hour. Also, actor Kevin Spacey, he's going to be in court tomorrow on charges of indecent assault. He plans to plead not guilty. Authorities say, though, they have video of the alleged assault. We're going to talk to our legal expert about how this could play out. Actor Kevin Spacey is going to be in a Massachusetts court tomorrow. He's set to be arraigned on charges that he groped a young man at a Nantucket bar back in 2016. According to a criminal complaint obtained by CNN, authorities have video of the incident involving Spacey and a busboy. The accuser was 18 at the time, told police that he told Spacey he was 23 years old. Criminal defense attorney Janet Johnson with us now. So, Janet, a couple of things to address here. Let's get to the first one. What's going to happen tomorrow in court if he intends to plead not guilty?
Good morning, Christy. Arraignment is normally a very, perfunctory court date. Usually you just plead not guilty, get out. It takes a few minutes. It's a little unusual in this case because Spacey's lawyers tried to get his appearance waived. They didn't want to have media attention, and the judge denied it. So I think it might take a little bit longer because the judge appears to be telling him, you're not going to be treated differently because you're a celebrity.
So I want to talk about the victim in this case, the alleged victim. He admittedly lied to Spacey about his age. He didn't come forward with the allegation for quite some time. How detrimental might that be to his case?
It is. If you're defending Kevin Spacey, those are really big points that you would make in a trial or in negotiating with, the prosecutor to say, you should reduce this to a simple battery because this kid has some issues. But I think the answer on the other side, remember in the Bill Cosby trial, there was a delay in reporting. And in this case, we actually have contemporaneous reporting to his friends, to his mother. People knew that this happened. There may even be video of this happening. So I think that will counterbalance it. Why he lied about his age, he's going to have to explain that at some point.
Well, and as I understand it, the video is only 1 second long. Can anything really be gleaned from that?
Well, it certainly shows that they had contact. Whether it shows the actual alleged crime, it probably doesn't. But if Spacey comes out and says, I don't even know this kid, I never met this kid, this certainly puts him, at the scene and in contact with the alleged victim.
So how do you anticipate Spacey is going to address this, or his team?
Well, right. If you're his attorney, you would say, this kid lied, so you can't trust him. Is he lying now? Was he lying then? He admitted that he's not telling the truth. Spacey either didn't grope him or it was consensual. Probably the latter. Probably saying, he was trying to have contact with Kevin Spacey. He admitted he was a fan. He said he was old enough to drink. So, is he trying to basically have his cake and eat it too? He wanted to have some contact with a celebrity, and maybe it didn't go the way he wanted it to go.
Of course, this isn't the only case that is highlighting some possible criminal behavior against Spacey. Right. How possible is it that that's going to lead any of those other cases or any of those other allegations are going to come up in this one in particular? They have to be isolated, don't they?
Well, they sometimes do and sometimes don't. Actually, if they're similar enough, if there are other allegations where you can say this is his modus operandi, this is his MO, he gropes underage boys, this is what he does, or young men. If they can come forward with enough allegations that are similar, they would be admitted, I think, in a trial against him, and that would, of course, be devastating.
All righty. Janet Johnson, thank you so much for your expertise, as always. Good to see you.
It's hard to forget the cries of children separated from their families at the U.S.-Mexico border from last summer.
No llores. Vas a llegar con... Mira, ella te va a explicar y te va a ayudar.
Con mi tía por lo menos para que después llegue mi mami. ¿Me puedes abrir alguien me cerró la puerta esa? Que me venga a traer mi tía para llevar.
That girl's name is Allison. She was a migrant from El Salvador, held at a detention center in Arizona. And she was begging for someone to call her aunt so she could reunite with her mother, who had no idea where she was. Her mom was at a detention center more than 1,200 miles away. And they were finally reunited in Houston just after their story went viral. Well, as CNN's Gary Tuckman reports, a lot has happened since then.
7-year-old Allison Jimena Madrid enjoying the day at the Children's Museum of Houston.
Are you happy today? ¿Tú eres feliz hoy?
Sí, muy feliz. Sí, mamá, de verdad.
A very different story from when she and her mother first came to this country. And now, almost 6 months later, they're getting ready for their first asylum hearing, the start of a process which will determine whether or not they can stay in the U.S. As they've waited for the hearing, Allison Jimena has been going to a public school in Houston. When she arrived in the U.S., she did not speak a word of English.
So, Allison Jimena, you have something you want to read?
Yeah.
Okay, let's hear in English.
Why I love America. I love my school. I love my church. I love to smile. I love and believe in the America dream. Happy New Year, America.
Happy New Year, America, to you too.
Happy New Year, America.
Her mother, Cindy, is doing her best to learn English at her church.
1, 2, 3, 4.
She cannot legally get a job at this stage of the asylum process, but says she wants to work.
Sea en limpieza, sea en un restaurante.
She says she would like to have a job cleaning or at a restaurant, or whatever job she can get, as long as she can do it with dignity.
Rox and Blair work together. They mix the cracked apples, sugar, salt, and water.
So what is the likelihood that daughter and mother will be granted asylum? Their lawyer says she is hopeful, but
there's a good chance that it may not be granted.
Attorney Garcia says Cindy Madrid left to protect Allison, her only child, from gang violence. Allison told us what her understanding is of that threat.
Me querían robar de mi mamá. Yo no quería.
The gang, she says, they wanted to steal me. The attorney says if Cindy Madrid loses her case and is sent back to El Salvador, that is not an overstatement.
Could be death. They had very serious problems with gang violence. They had no protection by the police as well. So we're not expecting anything good if she is returned back home.
Allison Jimena says Houston is now her home.
It is a sunny day when friends stick together.
El fin, the end.
The finish. Okay.
But this legal battle is far from finished. Gary Tuckman, CNN, Houston.
Good to get that update on her. So, are you ready for the glitz and the glam of the Golden Globes? Because they are tonight. Hollywood honoring the stars on